Jim Tew coming to you this morning, talking about swarm traps and when to put them up and how to put them up. Normally, I'd be talking with Kim, but Kim's not here again today. Jeff is visiting with us. Jeff, good morning.
Good morning, Jim. How are you doing?
Well, I'm actually all right. It's Friday morning, and it's springtime with maple in full bloom, and it's always exciting.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear it's springtime somewhere. It's what passes as spring here. It's raining.
Well, just to be sure you know, I'm Jim Tew.
And I'm Jeff Ott.
And we want to talk with you for a few minutes on this whole business of should you or could you use swarm traps that would help you get some free bees.
Sounds like fun. You are listening to Honeybee Obscura, brought to you by Growing Planet Media, the folks behind Beekeeping Today podcast. Each week on Honeybee Obscura, host Kim Flottum and Jim Tew explore the complexities, the beauty, the fun, and the challenges of managing honeybees in today's world in an engaging and informative discussion meant for all beekeepers, long-timers, and those just starting their journey with bees. So sit back and enjoy the next several minutes as Kim and Jim explore all things honeybees.
Jeff, I always mean to put swarm traps up. Tell me what you think before we go any further. What a swarm trap is.
Well, golly, where'd that word come from? My idea of swarm traps has evolved for over the years, and originally, way back when, the swarm trap was one of those inverted flower pots that they were selling long ago, about the time that the Africanized honeybee was coming around, and those were real popular then. But now, it's evolved. So I like the idea of swarm traps. I want to use them more than I do.
Nobody told me to do this, but when I was getting my thoughts together to talk to you and the listeners, I realized that by my way of looking at swarm traps, there's two kinds. There's the intentional kind, where I go out and climb a ladder and put this thing up on a bracket and close it down so squirrels can't get in it and all that kind of thing, and then watch as nothing happens. Or there's the kind that I really catch more swarms with, and that's the incidental equipment sitting around that I should have put away. I should have done something with it. I should have kept wax moths and mice out of it, but I just didn't get to it. And then one day, while you're there, a swarm moves in. So that is what I've called an unintentional swarm trap. Have you had bees moving old equipment just sitting around? It happens all the time.
I just need to comment on what you were saying before, because I'd never really thought of, if you would have told me what kind of different kinds of swarm traps are there, I would have listed off the inverted flower pot, the nuke, the Langstroth hive type box, the Sealy type box. Never in my life would have come up with the intentional or unintentional. But to answer your question, yes, I've had them move into an old empty hive that I've had sitting there, which just always astonishes me, but it shouldn't.
I want to tell you, and I want to tell the listeners, I've had it happen twice, and it's just exhilarating. It's just one of those white-hot moments in beekeeping. I have terrible hearing. My bad hearing is legendary. So in the bee yard 3-4 years ago, I kept thinking, is that an aircraft over my head? Is someone flying a drone, not a bee, but a small aerial aircraft over my head? What is the noise? So I had to move out from under the tree canopy and look up, and there was a huge swarm in the air above me. And I watched that swarm pinpoint. Out of all my equipment, live bees, dead bees, they pinpointed a hive they wanted, and I just stood out of the way while they moved back into that empty box. They found that empty hive body, ergo, an unintentional swarm trap, and they moved in, and I stood there and saw that as the same thing as counting my money. This is free bees.
Yeah. Well, this time of year, that's a $250 savings right there. I mean, that if you count the cost of a nuke, that's a nice savings.
I need you to send that comment to my wife and send it in several different formats so I'm sure that she gets it, because she's never heard savings and beekeeping in the same sentence. I'm sorry. I love beekeepers. Our scientist, my go-to guy, has become Tom Seeley, a very practical scientist who's always doing good work. Years ago, he and others at Cornell did some basic studies on this swarm trap thing. He said to put a box about 15 feet off the ground. So, you've got to climb a ladder and get high up and put brackets up there. I've got a friend who does probably what I would do if I wanted to get that high off the ground. I get up there once, and I'd put some kind of mechanism, a pulley and a hook and whatever, and then I would string it up. And then on that happy day when I got a swarm, I'd lower it down. When I didn't get a swarm and the season's clearly passed, you put it away so the thing doesn't hang out there and beat itself all winter instead of me climbing up and down ladder.
I can't remember which one of those is Seeley's book that's in, but that is a real fun study to watch, to review. And they did all sorts of studies on the size of the cavity, the size of the opening, the position of the opening, north, south, east, or west, or whatever. And so it really is helpful, at least as he always points out, in that area of upper state New York where they did the experiment, how high the bees preferred and what was accepted. But if you're serious about looking for trapping your own swarms, I think that would be a great resource to start.
This is where my intentional and my unintentional concept comes together, because if you decide you want to intentionally do this, Seeley said that about the right size box seems to be at least a medium super. A deep super wouldn't be bad.
Yeah.
And he said that he wanted it probably about 1.5 inches opening. I think he didn't say it. I'm saying from experience that the main thing I'm trying to do is to keep out birds and squirrels. So I restrict the opening quite a bit so that my bees would find the place.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've heard him, or what I read as well. I've not gone to the extent of building my own swarm trap with those dimensions. I have used an old deep, and one of the things we can talk about are the lures. What types of different lures, or do you need lures for that, or maybe just old brood comb?
Some of those lures are for sale. Mm-hmm. And I think if you'll check our sponsor, you would find that they're one of the sources that has these lemon-smelling lures for sale.
Better Bee is pleased to sponsor today's episode of Honeybee Obscura podcast. For over 40 years, Better Bee has supplied beekeepers across the country with the tools, equipment, and knowledge needed to succeed. Because many Better Bee employees are beekeepers themselves, they understand your needs and challenges and are better prepared to answer your beekeeping questions. From their colorful catalog to their support of beekeeper educational activities, including this podcast, Better Bee truly lives up to their tagline of beekeepers serving beekeepers. See for yourself at betterbee.com.
Those lures that you can get, sometimes you can make them yourself, sometimes you buy them. They really smell good. They smell like lemongrass, lemon.
Yeah.
So your whole shop, your whole bee operation smells good. You smell good. It masks the odor of that stinky smoke.
Well, you don't like smoke. Yeah, it does smell. It does smell good, and it does smell like a springtime in a bee yard, or even a swarm. That smell of a swarm.
Boy, I get off the subject so easily, but the smells in beekeeping, Kim and I tried to talk about that, the good smells, the bad smells, because there's no way to take that to a meeting. There's no way to hand around, here, smell this. There's no way to do that unless you pass around a frame of American foul brood or something, which, of course, would have every inspector in the audience going ballistic. But there is an odor in the air. There is an odor, a straw odor, an animal odor. It's not dirty. It's not offensive at all. It's when those bees are all bunched together in a swarm. So that odor isn't possibility. That is an attractant to some extent, but it's just part of beekeeping.
what have you used if you've designed or used your own lures?
I'm not prepared to go into that off the top of my head. I have not made my own lures in 20 years. I had to buy the components. There were 3 components. Jeff, I can't do it from memory, but it's too easy to buy them, and they always smell like lemon.
It's much easier to buy it than try to make it yourself, unless you'd like to knick-knack around it. Go ahead and give it a shot. There's also recommendations to just use lemongrass oil.
That was one of the primary components.
Yeah, and that's kind of gives it that lemony smell. But I will warn our listeners here that if you use lemongrass oil, a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah. And
that if you use too much, it just is overwhelming. And I know that's why I never attracted a swarm to that box. They said it stinks.
Well, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. And this is where I talk too much. And I always say I talk too much when I listen to these after they're finished. But I think that if I just had comb, or an old bee box with the propolis smell, that's really has to be what intrigues the bees, not so much my artificial swarm lures. So I think in the intentional world, where you do all you can, put the swarm lure in.
Right.
In the unintentional world, where you're doing other things and the equipment's just sitting there, there is, in a way, its own attractant, its own swarm lure there in the form of the natural odors and smells.
Regarding using old equipment and having a bee yard, would you recommend having just an old single deep, a couple frames of old brood comb in it as every season? Just leave it there to attract any swarms.
It adds to the decor of your yard to have rotting equipment sitting around and the weeds and the edge of the bushes. It looks like a real bee yard, but I'm being sarcastic, but I'm being serious. That is a retirement use of that equipment. But I need to step up and say that in a pure standpoint, you would be discouraged from actually using comb because of the possibility of diseases or wax moths or whatever. So on one hand, the comb is an attractant. On the other hand, don't use the comb because it is an attractant. But it's not attracting bees in that case, wax moths. But here we go again, Jeff. Which world are you in? The intentional world or the unintentional world? In the unintentional world, the comb's just sitting there and you haven't gotten around to doing anything with it. In the intentional world, you use these swarm lures, these that you bought, and you try to lure them into a nice cleaned out cavity where you can neatly make the transition when the swarm comes in that way.
This year, I think I will be setting up a empty hive with a couple, 1 or 2 frames of brood comb and maybe a couple frames of just foundation and just have it there just in case someone finds it and wants to use it.
I agree with you completely. I do have some old equipment with the corners rotted out and whatever, and that's fine. You don't have to have a big entrance, and just kind of neaten it up some. Put a frame or 2 in it. The suggestion was to use foundation. If you don't want to use comb, use a piece of foundation. Put a piece of beeswax in there or something. Keep the entrance reduced to keep out the mice and the birds, and just fish.
Yeah,
you got your bait out there. Just fish.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt, and even put them around. I know some of the beekeepers I know like to leave several of those out around the area of their bee yard, or maybe an out yard or their primary yard, just to catch those errant swarms that they miss. I think that's a good idea too if you have the time and equipment to set that up. I think that's a good option as well.
If you're a younger person, climb higher. If you're an older person, leave them on the ground.
Oh, definitely. No climbing ladders. Yeah. Well, Jim, we were talking about lures. Here's an idea to just stick in the back of your head somewhere. I was reading this morning that they're developing artificial lures for the Asian giant hornet. Now,
I've been reading that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I have been reading that.
Wouldn't that be fun to have a swarm of those, or have a queen show up in your yard? Or
no. You people in the Pacific Northwest, keep your vermin up there. I don't want it here in Ohio. I hope that works. I do hope that works.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting. Well, we're off topic here, but hopefully that'll be something that's no longer needed in the Pacific Northwest.
I hope not. Well, I'm going to do the swarm trap thing, but as we shut it down here, Jeff, I'd like to say you people continue to write us and interact with us. Use our comment page if you would, and we'll talk back and forth there. Becca wrote and wanted to know if using a hairdryer was okay instead of a heat gun. It is, but it's slower. So what else have you got? Michael wrote and said he'd like to use a deer wagon for hauling deer around. So be a good chance to get a discussion going if you want to have a web page discussion on our blog there.
Yeah. I want to encourage our listeners to use the comments section under each episode for leaving their observations or suggestions for new show topics, or even add to the conversation. We really would like to get our listeners to talk with each other and learn from each other, and to share. In addition to the comment section, I encourage folks to check the show notes for URLs for some of the topics we talked about here, maybe some lures or plans, and Seeley's book that will also be listed there in the show notes.
So this is a way to get rid of your old equipment. Give it a retirement life like Jim and Kim, and give us something to do in retirement. Use your old equipment for swarm boxes and see if you can pick up an extra swarm this season. It's a lot of fun to do it when it works, and you get to talk about it at bee meetings.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm hoping to catch many swarms from other people's bees this year.
Glad it's not mine. We're too far away. I'm finished with you, Jeff. I'm done.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jim.
I had a good time.